Welcome to Does It Matter by Brainy Ballers, where we dissect the game with cutting-edge analytics to give you the upper hand. We analyze everything from hand sizes to average depth of targets to uncover hidden trends that no one else sees. Say goodbye to guesswork and hello to data-driven domination. Because here at Brainy Ballers, we don't just watch the game, we understand it. So get ready, it's podcast time.
Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty interesting for anyone looking for that edge, especially in fantasy. Can a defensive back's athleticism rate, specifically measured by their relative athletic score, or R.A.S., can that really predict how well they'll do in the NFL, particularly, for fantasy football points? Our mission, as always, is to pull out the key stuff from the source material we looked at, give you that shortcut to being well-informed.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's quickly define R.A.S. It's a metric Kent Lee Platt came up with back in 2013. Basically, it takes all those combine and pro day drills, speed, agility, explosion size, and kind of boils them down into one number. It normalizes everything on a 0 to 10 scale, often color-coded, makes it easy to see. And this deep dive, well, it looks specifically at whether that number actually predicts performance.
Okay, and the source material here, it took a very specific angle, didn't it? They looked at NFL players, specifically defensive backs, who finished in the top 50 for fantasy football scoring every year since 2003. Then they compared the top 10 finishers places 1 through 10 to the bottom 10 within that group, so 41st to 50th place.
Right. The idea was to find a sort of happy medium for comparison. You avoid those really fringe players who might just pop up for a season and skew the data if you look too broadly.
So they set that up. Did we see a clear line? Super athletes equals fantasy studs.
It's funny you ask that because no. Not really. The initial look, just comparing average R.A.S. scores, no clear trends popped out. In fact, get this, in 12 of the 21 seasons they looked at, the top 10 group actually had the same or sometimes even higher average R.A.S. than the guys finishing lower down, like 31st to 50th.
Wow, okay. So higher R.A.S. didn't automatically mean top 10 fantasy finishes. That must have thrown a bit of a wrench in things initially.
It definitely caused some, let's say, initial skepticism about R.A.S. being a strong predictor. So where did the study go from there after that kind of mixed bag result?
Well, they shifted gears a bit. They moved to looking at a differences chart, trying to pinpoint if maybe specific R.A.S. thresholds mattered more. And they did find something interesting there.
Do you want to start dominating your drafts? At brainyballers.com, we've researched every metric under the sun for you to find which ones are best linked to fantasy points. You can access hundreds of metrics to sharpen your scouting ability so you know which metrics matter and which are just noise. Stop guessing on which thresholds to look for within each metric. Big numbers can be misleading or irrelevant. Our Ultimate Athlete Blueprints reveal essential scouting metrics, their importance and benchmarks within each metric that help predict a player's probability of being a success or bust. Elevate your scouting ability with Brainy Ballers' Ultimate Athlete Blueprints today. Click the link in the description. Now back to the show.
Initially, a R.A.S. of 8.9 and above, that seemed to show up more often in the high-performing DBs.
Okay, 8.9. But was that just like the average for all good DBs, or was it really pointing to the elite fantasy guys?
That was the question, right? So they refined it further. And this is probably the key takeaway if you're looking for one specific number range. They found the most productive R.A.S. zone for consistent top-tier fantasy performance seemed to be between 9.1 and 9.8. DBs in that specific athletic window, they showed up in the top 10 fantasy finishers 11.7% more often than they showed up in that bottom 10 group, the 41st to 50th guys. So, I mean, that's noticeable, right? It suggests some kind of tendency for those really elite athletes to hit the top tier. But is it enough? Like, if I see a DB with a 9.5 R.A.S., should I just automatically bump them up my draft board based purely on that?
Well, that's where the next piece of analysis comes in, and it's pretty crucial. Despite finding that, promising 11.7% bump in that specific 9.1 to 9.8 range, they also ran standard statistical regression tests.
Okay, the heavy stat stuff.
Exactly. They looked at the Pearson correlation value, which, basically measures how strongly two things are linked. And the Pearson value for R.A.S. and fantasy output for DBs, it came in at 0.093.
0.093. And just for context, right, something else we looked at, like quarterback draft capital, where a QB was drafted, which people generally agree has some influence. That showed a negative Pearson value of 0.219 in our analysis, stronger than R.A.S. for DBs. So the specific 9.1 to 9.8 range showed something, but overall, statistically, R.A.S. isn't really moving the needle much for fantasy points.
Pretty much, yeah. The overall statistical link just isn't strong.
And didn't the study also look at whether this has changed over time? Like, is R.A.S. becoming more or less important?
It did, yeah, and that added another layer. They found that whatever impact R.A.S. might have had, it actually seems to have diminished in recent years, especially for those mid-range fantasy finishers. The predictive power, weak as it was, seems to be fading a bit.
Okay, diminishing returns too. So putting all these pieces together, what's the big picture takeaway here for someone trying to get up to speed?
Well, the conclusion is definitely nuanced, right? It's not as simple yes or no. On one hand, yes, those DBs with truly elite athleticism, that 9.1 to 9.8 R.A.S. sweet spot, they did appear more consistently among the very top fantasy performers. There's that 11.7% bump. But, and this is a big but, the overall statistical correlation just isn't there. That .093 Pearson is telling. And its predictive value seems to be weakening over time anyway.
So, bottom line for someone prepping for fantasy, or just trying to evaluate prospects.
Bottom line, don't rely on R.A.S. as a standalone metric for defensive backs. Definitely not. Maybe a small piece of the puzzle. Something to note if a player falls into that elite 9.1, 9.8 range, but you absolutely need to weigh it against, college production, draft capital, landing spot, coaching scheme, all the other factors. Take it with a big grain of salt.
Right. So it's a classic case of an interesting finding that 9.1 to 9.8 range, but the broader stats say, hold on a minute. It really makes you think, doesn't it? In any field, really. How do you balance those specific, maybe compelling indicators against the bigger statistical picture? When does one specific data point warrant, a deeper look? And when is it maybe just noise or an interesting anomaly? Definitely something to mull over as you keep building that well-informed perspective.